Okay, so this is week 3 of the journey in the guide, and there's a bit of a change on this week. It's a bit of a change of gear, but you'll get a sense of that in the second half. So just to briefly recap and to remind you what the home practice was, and then once again we'll split up into the groups, see how you got on with your home practice, whether you need to be sheepish or not, and then we'll have a cup of tea, and then we'll introduce the next phase. So one of the things that I've been thinking, re-exploring all this material. Hi there, come in. There's a seat at the front. There always is, for some reason, just there. Well, sometimes there, sometimes there as well. I led a ritual on Sunday night. Some of you were here, and there was everybody was everywhere. There was just a great big space around me, like I had body odour. Slightly alarming. So one of the things I was thinking, re-exploring this material is that slightly sort of, for various reasons, hooked on this thought about ideology. Do you remember, I think it was here I was saying that this word Buddhism isn't a very good word for Buddhism, because it makes it sound like an ideology, like Marxism or feminism or nationalism, National Socialism. They're ideologies. I've come to feel more and more averse to ideology because ideology is abstract. It's not to do with people, it's to do with an abstraction of people, and it's often applied to an abstraction, sometimes at the expense of people. The 20th century has been a century completely marred by ideology, whether it's the Marxist right or the Marxist left and the fascist right. What you've had is a century of ideology. It's been the century of ideology. And if you have this word Buddhism, you start thinking it's teaching another ideology. I think the better way of thinking about it is that Buddhism teaches value, as opposed to ideology. That what we're trying to learn... Come in. Hi there. Find yourself a place. What we're trying to learn when we start exploring what I'd just like to call the journey, because I think of it as the journey of human life. It's a journey into more and more value, uncovering value in ourselves, in the life around us, living from that value more and more, expressing it more and more, until eventually you become value. And the Buddha, the figure of the Buddha on the shrine, represents someone who's completely transformed themselves into like kind of pure value, if you see what I mean. And value is always specific and concrete. It's always applied to the particular mental state you're in. So the Buddha would always want to know what mental state you're in. Is it a positive mental state, is it a state of value, or is it a state of dissipation, distraction, destruction, and so on? He's trying to communicate human value and a deepening of human value, and that human value deepens to such a point that Buddhahood is possible. But I think that's quite different from ideology. So what we're learning here is we're trying to discover in ourselves our instinct for value, which we all have: aesthetic value, moral value, human value, the values of kindness, of honesty. This word value, by the way, the best way of understanding it is that values are things that are good in themselves. They're not for the attainment of other things. So when you see someone being genuinely honest, that seems an end in itself, if you see what I mean. You're not honest for some other reason. If you are, you're not being so honest. If you're kind for some other reason, you're not really being kind. We're trying to move towards pure value, if you see what I mean, for no reason apart from the values. Now, all of us have a sense of value. What we call Buddhism, what the Buddha called his Dharma, really is trying to uncover value in ourselves and live from it more and more. Live from it and when I say live from it, I mean in all one's life, in all one's behaviour, that you become a kind of locus of human value. Very, very different thing than becoming a locus of ideology, even an apparently good ideology, because even so-called good ideologies, if you don't fit in with that ideology, they suddenly become bad ideologies. And an ideology is renowned for becoming cruel because it's abstract. It doesn't apply to the particular person and conditions that you're experiencing. It's an abstract idea placed on top of particularities, and that always distorts experience. So Bhante Sangharakshita, the founder of our movement, he's really renowned for teaching in a certain way publicly, but then when he meets individuals, sometimes to people's irritation, he'd say exactly the opposite of something he'd say in a talk like this, because he always said, I relate to the person, the individual, and what I think will help them, which is different from some sort of abstract universal idea that you think all people should do. Yeah. So we're trying to become a kind of locus of value, and therefore be a source of good for the world, and a source of the good for the world, including ourselves, obviously. So the first great value that we're exploring is the value of integration, of wholeness, of unification, of psychophysical harmony, of unity, and so on. So the first 2 weeks, that's what we've mainly been exploring. In the first week, that was mainly to do with trying to see that our prapuncture, which is this sort of Buddhist word for mental proliferation, I think it's as good as you saying the stories we tell ourselves and about each other and about the world. We're trying to learn, first of all, to step out of that prapuncture into something much more direct and immediate, less abstract, effectively. Thought itself tends to abstraction, to classification, to separation. So you're trying to step out of that into something much more lived, yeah? And that is the first way that we start to integrate ourselves. We notice how scattered we are, and when we're scattered, what we mean is we've got lots of different selves competing. The person that wants to get up and meditate, the person that doesn't. The person who wants to be kind to people, the person that doesn't want to be kind to people. The person that wants to get their way, the person that wants to help. They're all kind of at variance with each other in ourselves. We are our own crowd, aren't we? So the first thing to do is to notice that in this, it's expressed primarily through prapuncture. There's an epithet for the Buddha, which means nisprapuncture, which means no prapuncture. So he doesn't do that. Apparently there's no, in Buddhahood, there's a state of being, in other words, human beings can attain to a place where you just don't do that stuff. Mental proliferation, fantasizing, planning and remembering, strategizing and so on, predicting, assuming, that's all prapuncture, yeah? And it can be quite happy and it can be really agonized. But the Buddha has none of that, yeah? Nisprapuncture. So that's the first thing we're trying to train in. Just that we can't stop prapuncture, but we can keep on noticing it and stepping out of it. The Buddha, I think, would want to teach that for a long time. He'd say, never mind about the rest, actually, for a bit. You won't be able to think about other stuff because you'll just think with your head. Thinking there should be some sort of qualification for thinking. You shouldn't be allowed to do it until you've proved yourself to be emotionally healthy, physically healthy. There should be some sort of road test. And then think, can you do a bit of thinking? Only a bit. I think it's wildly overrated, generally speaking. Mostly because we're not emotionally positive enough to think. There's much more to think, but many of us, our thinking is skewed by our ideologies and by our negativities. Mine is, and I'm sure yours is. I'm not in a polite mood tonight, am I? I don't always know what mood I'm in. So that's the first part of integration. The second thing we were trying to explore last week, the second really important area of integration, there's lots more to say about it, but this will have to be enough, which is that you try to take full ownership of your life. Yeah. So if you had to give a key word for week 2, it would be this word of taking full ownership for your life. And this means renouncing blame. Yeah, blaming your parents, blaming the state, blaming the centre, blaming your friends. Blame is very deep with us human beings. We want to blame. So integration includes this sense of fully taking responsibility for oneself. Quite difficult to quite get the tenor of this right. Yes, but the example I use in the book is you meet people who say, I'm a really chilled out person, but life keeps stressing me out. You know what I mean? That I myself am like really chilled and cool, but all these terrible things keep happening, they keep stressing me out, as if there's no relationship between the two. Or, I'm a really punctual person, I'm always in bad traffic. There's some reason that stops you, that we identify, in other words, with a part of ourselves, often with the part of ourselves we think that is nice and lovely, but people keep on winding me up, this person's a pain. We've got all sorts of reasons for disowning aspects of ourselves, and usually placing them onto other people. It's very deep in human beings, I think. It's unbearable to hold oneself. I think one of the signs of genuine spiritual growth is actually, I'm in this sort of mood, when you start to realise how awful you are, in a certain sort of way. When I first came along to the centre, I thought I was like a really nice person, but a tad neurotic. I was willing to admit to sadness, neurosis, unhappiness, self-pity, self-hatred. I wasn't very willing to admit to hatred of others, criticism of others, anger. I've wanted those to... in my history, I put all those on my brothers. They were people like that. Hope they're not watching. Hi. All water under the bridge. I'm actually going to a family wedding this weekend, so I might show this at the wedding. Garum. Anyway, I kind of put all that on them. I was the victim of them. Blah, blah, blah. It wasn't entirely untrue. They were actually rather cruel to me. And need to pay. But I sort of displaced all that. Do you see what I mean? So actually the person I thought I was, my identification of myself, my ownership of myself was very partial. It was the bits of myself I thought other people would like and approve of, including actually things like self-hatred. That got me a very strong sympathy vote for quite a long time. It's very tempting to grasp onto certain aspects of yourself and identify with them and push other aspects away or blame them on other people. We all do it. It's very, very deep for human beings, I think. Eliot's saying we cannot bear too much reality, and part of that is this, I think. So what this stage of integration, it means really being able to say, this is me. This anger, this hatred, this sense of vengeance, this sense of indignation, this sense of whatever it is, this sense of lust, whatever it is, this sense of joy even, because sometimes you can weirdly identify with the negatives and not the positives. I have a friend who identifies very strongly with what he doesn't have. I'm rather prone to this myself, actually, identifying that I don't have this, I don't have this, I don't get that. You can identify with lack, even. You see what I mean? And actually weirdly edit it out. Oh, yes, but I did get that, and I did get that, but you sort of edit it out. Quite difficult to notice, I see in myself. We human beings are constantly editing the film of our life, usually in our favour, or at the very least along the narrative that we've decided that is our life. So if you think that nobody likes me, you edit along that line and see evidence for that and edit out evidence that doesn't fit that yet. We'll be coming back to this later on. I think it's a very, very deep matter and the cause of all kinds of hatred between us. Very difficult to bear. When you really, sometimes, I don't know whether you felt this yet, but when you really don't like someone, you think, this is really, really horrible. This sense of, the punitive sense of, dislike and so on. Really, really, dislike is too pale a term, isn't it? So, Buddhism, I think, is extremely, it's trying to say everything needs to come on board with this journey. if you use that metaphor of the journey, you need to take everything with you. You cannot afford to leave anything out, because that's all of your energy is caught up in all of that. Especially you can't just cut out the darker bits and leave Mr. Bright, spiritual person. That's really unhealthy, and usually all it does is it leads to some dreadful thing later on. So you're trying to take ownership, full ownership of your life, renouncing blame, easy said than done, etc., etc. You're trying to take full ownership of your life. So one of the things that I've suggested in the book is that one way we do that in Triratna is telling our life story. I've done this many times. So you might, if you start to get connections on the course, you might organise, if you want to, in your group or just a few of you, you might say, well, why don't we meet up for an evening outside the course and tell our life stories? It's part of this sense of, this has been the story of my life, and trying to, when you tell your life story, trying to a bit look out for the bits that you edit out. I noticed, telling my life story over many years, I've been coming along for many, many years, that my life story has changed. My early life was very much about the cruelty of my brothers. That was my theme. And that, because of that theme, I was this kind of person because of those events. I now find I hardly talk about that at all. I can't even quite remember why I was so very preoccupied by that. Can't even quite remember the truth of it anymore. I now remember much more that I was, as a child, terribly tearful. As I said, all my photographs of my family are all grinning apart from me, who is crying in every photograph. And with children in my life myself, I know what it's like to have a child around who's always unhappy, and how difficult that is. And I'm starting to see more that side. Gosh, that must have been difficult for my parents. That must have been hard going for my brothers, who are much more, they're much more blokey than I ever was. I was always very sensitive, even super sensitive. I didn't understand that. They didn't understand that. I feel much less committed to a certain sort of story of my life. And what that does is it opens your life to you. You start to discover new things about your life, new riches, and new pains, yes, but new riches as well. You can't have one without the other. You start to lessen your grasp on the narrative of you. And that becomes really liberating. It takes time, but it's really liberating. So those are our first 2 weeks. Yeah. So that's what we've been doing. And I've been asking you last week to do the mindful walk, the breathing space, and Sibhadramati was talking about reflecting on your actions, and we'll look at more at that tonight. Yeah. But let's just start with meditating a bit briefly, just to settle ourselves and arrive. Okay, is everybody here? It is hot, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so just sit comfortably for a while. I'll just introduce the theme for this week. Yeah, so the first value that we're exploring. So the first value that we're exploring on this course is this value of integration, of wholeness, of unity, of being one person. The more whole we are, the more complete we are, the more we can start to experience things beyond ourselves, which we're going to come to later on. It's actually a really key value, this value of wholeness, of non-disintegration, of non-vociferation. Posh word. Nice to get a posh word in every so often. Look that one up. Non-distraction and so on. And with a value, it's never something you get to the end of. So even though it's put here at the start, It doesn't mean to say that you do that and then you move on. It means that this is one value that we're constantly trying to do, yeah? And sometimes you'll feel this value very strongly and be living from it, and sometimes you'll feel really the absence of it. And I still feel that. So where I feel this sense of wholeness most is on retreat, almost immediately and almost completely reliably. And you forget how lovely it is. We're terribly forgetting creatures. We forget that it's better to be in a good mood than a bad mood. We forget that it's better to be whole rather than distracted. We forget, yeah, I forget, and you'll forget, yeah. So one of the things that you'll experience on retreat is this great sense of wholeness, and it's such a relief. Because disintegration isn't just that we're in bits, those bits are often at war with each other. And they cause a lot of noise and agitation, yeah. And when it goes, even for a bit, and like particularly when your meditation goes deeper, my experience of it, when particularly in meditation, the sign that you know your meditation is going deeper is when you start to feel this sense of wholeness, of unity, of harmony. And you experience it as a kind of quietening, a unification, like all of your energies flowing together rather than being kind of broken and aversive. My metaphor for it always is, in my family home we used to have the washing machine in the kitchen, and where we ate, we had everything in the same room, including 2 very large Alsatians, but that's another matter. And it was a very old washing machine, so when it was on dryer, it almost walked across the kitchen and asked to be turned off. It was like a thunder. But as a child, you sort of don't really notice it, and then it goes off. You have this lovely sense of a relief. You have that, when a noise goes off, you hadn't quite noticed how much distress it was causing, and then it goes off, and So wholeness is like that. Unity, particularly in meditation, it's like that. This lovely sense of, oh gosh, I hadn't realised how much noise and noise, was going on, and how agitated I was by that. Yeah. So you're trying to create that in meditation. You're trying to create that out of meditation, and remember, it'll come and go in waves. Sometimes it'll be lovely, you get this lovely kind of wholeness, and you think, yeah, and then the next one, it won't be like that. Yeah. So that's the first value, and we need to keep on cultivating that value, discovering that value, putting ourselves in conditions that help us find that value. And there's not much out there that's helping you. At the moment, the media is trying to get at you from every direction, really. Everyone wants your attention. So if you don't own your attention, somebody else will. Yeah? Because everybody wants to get it, from Facebook to whatever it is, advertising. Everyone is trying to get your attention and manipulate it. So it's never been so important to learn how to own your own attention, because everybody else is trying to get it from you. Yeah? Incredible new change, I think, in life. But the second value is a value of positive emotion. At least that's how I put it in the book. I've used that language because it's a language that my teacher, Sayagratchita, originally used. I don't think it's a terribly good way of putting it. The word positive is a bit cheery and upbeat, and it comes to be a bit vapid, doesn't it? And emotion is too emotional. So that's my title, Destroyed. I slightly like emotional strength, I think is a bit better. Except for that doesn't quite show you an aspect of it. A technical Buddhist way of putting it is kusala karma, which sounds like a pop song by that group whose name I can't remember. Anyway, never mind. Kusala karma. Kusala means skillful, valuable, useful. Can also mean intelligent. Karma means action. So this is the stage of action, is the first thing to say about this second virtue, this second value. It's a stage of action. the first value is the stage of unification, of harmonization, of ownership, of self-ownership. On the basis of knowing yourself, know thyself, you can start to act wisely. Quite often the reason we act unwisely is because we don't know ourselves sufficiently. We don't realise our limits, our limitations. We don't realise the kind of creature we are. One of the issues, I think, for integration is discovering how you work. It's taking me forever to discover this. We human beings are extremely odd because we're like each other and we're unlike each other. So you can never create a general rule to say, just do like this, because we're all also different from each other, but not completely different from each other. So you might be an introvert or an extrovert. You might find that certain conditions you flourish in, certain conditions you don't. You need to start to read yourself, if you mean. Where do your qualities most come out? And what destroys them? If you're in boring, repetitive work, will tend to destroy them. We need to find the kind of creature we are and literally how we work best. And I think that's an element of integration. So you need to know yourself and then try to shape your life in such a way as you work well, if you see what I mean. Many of us, for instance, aren't getting enough sleep. There's lots of sleep studies now, aren't there? But a lot of doctors think that we're now chronically sleep deprived. And if you're sleep deprived, you won't work as well. You'll get irritated, you won't be able to think as clearly, and so on. That's a fairly universal one. But I'm, for instance, a little bit of an arty person. I don't know whether you've noticed. And if I don't do something a little tiny bit creative, I'm very prone to boredom. I get terribly bored. And if I get bored for too long, somebody gets into trouble. So sometimes all I need to do is fiddle with a bit of a poem, and then I feel a bit better, and I can get back to my emails, whatever it is. You need to discover how you work so as to make wise, skillful choices about how to behave. Yeah. So this second value is the stage of action on the basis of, ideally, self-ownership, self-knowledge, knowing yourself. Yeah. Yes. So you're trying to act wisely, intelligently, skillfully, as a kusala usually means, which means it's got that sense of being intelligent, in the sense of it's in your own best interest to act like that. It's not in your interest to act like this. Yeah. So, really, this is where the whole of Buddhist ethics arises from. Is this matter of kusala karma, of how to act in a way that's in your own best interests and in other people's best interests. So this is also the stage of moral agency. It sounds a bit posh. It just means deciding to act in a way that flourishes your life and flourishes the lives of those around you. Because that's in your own best interest. You will actually also works contrawise. So the more you do that, actually the more it helps you integrate. The more negative states you get into, the less integrated you are. Yeah? It tends to shatter you if you're in negative states. It's interesting that there's many more words for negative states of mind than positive states of mind. When you're in a really good state of mind, it's quite difficult to say how you feel, isn't it? You just say, I feel great. That you don't feel... Whereas if you're in a bad mood, you can say, I feel resentful, I feel critical, I feel aversive, I feel hateful, I feel blame. You've got lots of words for that range, but you haven't got actually that many words for positive states of mind. And that's because positive states of mind, by their nature, cohere. So you can't tell whether you're feeling uplifted or happy or grateful or altruistic or calm, because they all start to cohere together. As soon as you get into one positive state of mind, it coheres with all the others. Negative states, I hadn't meant to say this, but never mind. Negative states of mind split you up. They fragment you. So literally you can say, I was feeling resentful, but not hateful. I was feeling angry. You can have all these different words. I was feeling self-intoxicated. I was showing off. I was, you got lots of words for negative states of mind. And that's because they literally split you up more. So it's easier to label them. The more positive state of mind you're in, it's actually very, very difficult to say, quite describe it. You just think people start saying things just really, I don't know, it's fantastic. You end up with those kind of rhetorical marks that say, I can't really tell you what it was like. This second stage of positive emotion or kusala karma is the stage of acting in your own best interest and the other's better interest, which really means fostering the good. I feel that for most of us, all of the time, this needs to be one of our main actions, is that we foster the good. There's lots of negative things. I'm at the moment having to deal with quite a lot of negative things. And if I'm not careful when I do that, I keep being reminded of Hamlet, where Hamlet's ghost, the ghost of Hamlet's father, says, but take not thy mind, doesn't he? He says, avenge thy murder, but take not thy mind. I'm very struck by it. Keeps coming back that you have to be very careful working with negative things around you, because negativity is kind of infectious. And even when this is why political discourse is so often dreadful, because even if you're then trying, criticising Trump, whoever else you want to, in my day it was always Mrs. Thatcher. Anyone remember her? Anyway, political discussions were always about Mrs. Thatcher. And even if you're kind of right, do you see how it's very easy to get just sucked into the negativity. You're trying to sort of aid it, but you taint your mind as you go into it. It's actually quite difficult to valuably face negativities and usefully help without getting drawn into them. That's what I find anyway. I think it's much more possible to do that, because sometimes you do need to criticise other people, situations, institutions, all kinds of things. To do that effectively, you really need to, when I say you, I mean me, we all need to put much more weight on making sure that mostly we're contributing to the positive. What have I done today that's positive, that's good, that's added? That protects you from the disintegrating effect of negativity. Yeah. The best way not to do negative things is to do more positive things. In Buddhism, the metaphor is that if you I don't know if you've ever done woodwork and you put a doweling plug into the joint to keep the joint together, and the metaphor they use is that if you want to get one of those little doweling plugs out, you knock in another one. So in other words, to knock out something unskillful, you don't get too worried about the unskillful, you knock in a skillful thing. Do you see what I mean? That's the kind of Buddhist take on it, which is much more skillful, much more skillful. So really these next 2 weeks are all about how can I make a contribution to my own life? How can I make a contribution to the lives of others? I want to talk about it in lots of ways, some of which I can't decide yet. But one of the ways I recently made a contribution to my own life, this is an advert, is to read Marilyn Robinson's novel, Gilead. Has anyone read it? It's quite staggering, I think. People have been suggesting I read it, and I don't know about it. When people suggest I read things, I think, I'm not sure. Anyway, I read it, and it's quite clearly a literary masterpiece and a religious masterpiece, I think. But what was striking, it's so humane, it's very funny, it's so sad at times. When you read it, you feel in reading it, I don't know whether you felt this, you feel your life deepening. You just think, this is just, it took me so long to read it because I kept on rereading paragraphs. You just think,
another home is also about the same.
Yeah, I just run out and bought it straight away. I couldn't believe it. It's the same thing. I can't tell you. Anyway, I mustn't go on about it. It's one of those books where I want to buy lots of copies and insist on my friends reading it. But I really felt that lovely thing when you just do that thing called reading a novel. I don't know whether you remember that. but you don't have to press anything. You just kind of open it and then you have to read, and you have to turn it. It does involve moving your body a bit. But you can do it with a cup of tea, and you have to hold it. So it's a bit tricky. But when you get, at first it's a bit bumpy, and you sort of think, I might prefer to do something on Facebook or write an email. But once you get into it, especially if it's a work as wonderful as Gilead, you have this lovely sense of, in that moment, enriching and deepening your own life. It's really quite palpable. You feel it. It's not an ideology. You feel it. Gosh, I'd forgotten just the pleasure of reading a novel and enjoying it so much. I want to read it slower because I don't want to get to the end of it. I remember that when I was young, reading Dickens, reading it slower and slower because I couldn't bear to leave them. These characters that were living in my mind. Apparently Dickens himself felt that as well, didn't he? He couldn't bear to leave them at the end of the novel. Presumably why they're so long. Apparently when he was writing, he would march around in the room. There's a story of one of his daughters. When she was ill, he'd just make her bed under his desk, and she'd lie there. He wasn't a great father. And he'd just march around doing all the voices, speaking, and she could hear him just doing all the voices. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a class, a simple way of enriching your own life. Is read something that you just actually have an evening to read. And then the most important two ways, I think, of enriching your own life and the others, if you want to move it to a more kind of obviously ethical thing. I never like this language of ethics. It always feels so tedious, doesn't it? Even the word, you slightly go to sleep when you hear the word. Karl Popper, the German philosopher, he thought that of philosophy, he said there's a bit in Aristotle, I think, and a bit in Schopenhauer he thought was good, but he said most of it's just hot air, the philosophy of ethics. He said it's pretty much straightforward, you need to do good stuff, how much more do you need to say, sort of. So the two things I really want to give you as your home practice is, first of all, to cultivate gratitude. Gratitude is one of the most important things to cultivate. Very, very easy, as I said, to be attached to what you haven't got, to be aware of what you don't get. And that's just because the human mind is wired for threat. So we will instinctively pick up, notice, talk about, dwell upon things that feel like they threaten us. So they did some research that you go to 10 different shops, and if the last shop you go to, the person that's serving you isn't very friendly, it's that experience that you'll remember, and it's interestingly that experience you'll talk about. You won't talk about the other 9 shops. You'll talk about, you can't believe I went to Sainsbury's and they just looked through me. Human beings are wired for threat, so threat shows up to us very much, which means we need to make more of a conscious effort to notice what isn't threatening, which is actually... So that's why one of the reasons why gratitude is so important. Otherwise, we will tend to just notice what is threatening us. And most of our threats nowadays, of course, are social threats. They're not survival threats. But it's the same kind of wiring. So what I'd like you to do for the next 2 weeks as your home practice is to write, before you go to bed every night, write 5 things that you feel grateful for in that day. Yeah? 5 things. Really, really simple. So just to encourage the skeptics, there has been research based on this very thing of writing 5 things. So they got one group of people to write 5 things they felt grateful for. They've got another group of people to write 5 things that happened that day, and another group of people to write 5 things that they found difficult that day. And even at the end of just 2 weeks, people who wrote 5 things they felt grateful for were significantly happier. Yeah? So if you start getting into a low mood, and we all get like that, before you go to bed, think of 5 things you feel grateful for. And what you'll notice is you'll start to notice that more in your life. You'll start to find more things that you feel grateful for. Yeah? So see if you can do that for the next 2 weeks, because that follows the whole 2 weeks of positive emotion or kusala karma. Yeah? And then the other thing I want you to do is see if you can every day do one generous thing that you don't kind of need to do. Do one generous action a day. Yeah? Generosity. If we were to talk about Buddhist ethics, if we were to write a philosophy of Buddhist ethics, most of it would want to be on generosity. When we think about ethics, we tend to think about sex. I don't know why, but as soon as people talk about ethics, it tends to go on to the ethics of sex. And there are ethics, of course, of sex. But from a Buddhist point of view, not being generous is extremely serious. And I've never heard anyone talk about that. Actually, if you're generous, that's the main thing to start with. Yeah? You can be dreadful in lots of other ways, that's up to you. But not being generous, from a Buddhist point of view, is extremely serious. Yeah? Much more serious than other things. Yeah? So see if you can do one generous thing a day. In the office, make tea for people, be the person who goes and gets the donuts, etc., etc. And what I find, and what probably you'll find, is it often takes a bit of effort. I mean, this is also this new stage we're onto, is kusala karma takes some effort. You have to use an effort of will very often to exercise the good, don't you? I often feel regretful of my own lack of thoughtfulness. Quite often it's, oh gosh, why didn't I do more there? Oh, why didn't I? Sometimes you catch yourself doing things where you think, gosh, why didn't I do that? When you remember and when you're in a different mood, it's really kind of galling. You think, why didn't I just sort of give a bit there? Why did I make a start? Why couldn't I just go, oh yeah, I can see what you mean, da-da. Why didn't I give a bit there, yeah? So it does take more kind of conscious effort to practice kusala karma. And you don't need to do it in like massively huge ways, da-da-da. You're just trying to be, quite simply, a bit more generous. And see if you can notice the effect it has on you, yeah? We're not doing it for some goodly religious reason because we ought to be nice people. From a classic Buddhist point of view, what we mean by, sometimes this is translated, kusala karma is translated as beneficial activity. What we mean by beneficial is beneficial in helping you gain enlightenment. It doesn't mean beneficial in a kind of goody-goody way. It means that you get closer to reality when you act generously. Yeah? So see if you can notice the effect on you. And then lastly, what I'm going to be suggesting that you start to do is build a daily meditation practice. So from this week on in the book, I include a kind of approach to meditation this week. I say, here's what I suggest you do this week. As I said, this is one of my kind of main aims for the whole course, is that you use this course as a way of setting yourself up to a daily meditation practice. Even if you don't do your mindful walk, if you don't do your breathing space, if you don't reflect on your good things and bad things, whatever you do, see if you can get that daily meditation going. And you'll find that you'll get it going for a bit and then it'll fall apart. For some people it's quite difficult to get it going. I just sort of did it because I was told to. That seemed to work for me, but it doesn't work like that for everyone. And even if it means, okay, I meditated once last week, I'm going to meditate 3 times this week. But I'm going to definitely do it, come what may. See if you can now start quite consciously. How do you get yourself to do that? Is it, okay, there you go, here's my time, I'm going to do it every morning. Some people are very good like that. Some people are very regular in their instincts. Some people are just much more irregular. I'm sometimes regular, sometimes irregular. So find out how you're going to do that. So you might say, tell you what, I'll just definitely do it 3 times. Or you might say, I'll do it every day. Or you might be saying, tell you what, this is too much for me yet. I can't do that yet. So I will do that breathing space thing, and I will do that mindfulness walk, and I will do that generosity and gratitude thing. In fact, you could just think, tell you what, generosity and gratitude is enough for me just now. That would be fine. Because that actually is a way of starting you to meditate. Because if you were to be generous and grateful every day, you'd get into a better and better state, and then it'd be easier to want to meditate. Yeah. So see if you can start to think about how you're going to set up a daily meditation practice. Without a daily meditation practice, this matter of taking ownership of your life, which I say your mind, but I really mean your life, taking ownership of your life and steering it in a valuable, beneficial, fruitful way, it's just too hard. There's too much against you, especially living in the city and so on. So many factors in life that are making us stressed out, irritable, critical, aversive, thoughtless and so on. There's just so much. I find that, and I live here, we all need this kind of daily time where I'm going to now just work on my mind. That's what I'm doing now, because it's kind of like a symbol for saying, actually, my life's important. It's really, really important to me, and I want to really help it flourish. I don't want to just be driven by whatever happens to happen to me. If we don't take ownership of our mind, we're very, very prey to whatever happens to happen to you, don't you? Which is usually that your screen is on, or something else is kicking off. Unless we take ownership of our mind, our life will run us instead of us running our life. And there'll always be a bit of always be a tension between those two things. See if you can use the rest of these weeks to set up that daily meditation practice. So what I suggest we do now is just sort of break up into, like ad hoc groups of 3, say, and just say what you're going to do this week. Really make it very specific. I'm going to do the 5 gratitudes. I'm going to do the generosity. I'm going to meditate, or not. Or what are you going to do? I will carry on the mindful walk, but I'm going to stop the breathing space because I don't really get on with it. Or I'm not going to do the mindful walk. But be really clear. Don't do too many things. 2 or 3 things, 3 at most. See if you can be really clear you're going to do it, and so that you can come back next week and say you've done it. Yeah. So let's talk about that just now.